Earth was peaceful. For many years, humans had not seen war. People were building, exploring, and living better lives. The colony on Mars was the newest dream. It had homes, schools, and gardens under glass domes. Families were happy. Children played under the red sky. Everyone believed the hard times were over. But peace can be broken in a second. It started without warning. One moment, the colony was sending normal reports. The next, silence. No signals. No life signs. The Earth Command tried to contact them again and again. Nothing came back. Satellites around Mars showed something strange. A black shadow moving fast. Then lights. Then fire. Then everything turned dark. The news came quickly. Over 50,000 people were gone. Destroyed in 1 hour. There were no survivors. People on Earth were shocked. Everyone asked the same question. Who did this? And why? Soon, a message arrived. It came from deep space. The senders were called the Karn. Their words were cold and proud. They said the Mars colony was a threat. They said the attack was just a warning. No apology. No regret. Just a clear message. Stay in your place, or more will come. The leaders of Earth were angry but calm. They sent back a peaceful message, asking to talk. They did not want war. They offered a meeting, a chance to avoid more death. The Karn answered with fire again. They attacked a smaller human station near Jupiter. Only 200 people lived there. All were killed. The station exploded into pieces. The Karn left no survivors once again. The anger began to grow. On Earth, people filled the streets. They held up signs. They called for action. Soldiers stood ready. Warships were powered up. Factories began working day and night. But still, Earth's leaders waited. They didn't want to rush. Maybe there was still hope for peace. Then came the video. It was sent by a broken escape pod, floating near Mars. Inside was the body of a soldier. He was burnt, barely alive when he had recorded the message. The video showed the final minutes of the Mars colony. It showed Karn soldiers walking through fire. They laughed as they destroyed homes. They laughed as humans screamed and ran. The soldier's voice was weak. He said, "We didn't even fight back. They just wanted to kill." Then the screen went black. The video was seen by every person on Earth. It was played again and again on every screen. People cried. People screamed. People swore revenge. At the Earth United Council, the top leaders gathered. There were no more soft words. There were no more hopes for peace. A decision was made. The president stepped forward to speak. Her face was calm, but her eyes were full of fire. The world listened in silence. "They crossed the line," she said. "Now we show them what it means to face humanity." Across the world, people stood up. Workers in factories began building weapons. Old soldiers returned to duty. Young men and women volunteered to fight. Even people who hated war said, "This time, it's different." In space, giant warships were prepared. Ships bigger and faster than ever before. Inside them were pilots, engineers, and fighters ready to defend their home. On the moon, scientists worked on secret weapons, tools made not for war, but for survival. Everyone knew something important had changed. The attack on Mars was not just an attack on a colony. It was an attack on every human. It was a message that said, "You are nothing." But humanity had its own message. It said, "You made a mistake." As the ships began to rise into space, as the weapons were loaded, as soldiers said goodbye to their families, one thing became clear to all. This would not be a short fight. This would be the fight that decided everything. The Karn had no idea what they had started, but they were about to learn. Because this time, humanity was not going to wait. Humanity was going to unleash hell. The decision was made. The Earth had no choice but to fight back, but the question remained, how? The Karn were not just another alien species. They were powerful, ruthless, and they didn't fear death. But the human spirit was something different. Humans had been tested by time, by war, by their own mistakes, and they had learned one important truth: they would always fight for survival. It didn't take long for the leaders of Earth to rally. The Earth United Council worked fast, pushing every resource toward one goal: victory. Factories across the world were transformed into production lines for war materials. Steel was smelted, engines were built, and weapons were made. The factories ran day and night, nonstop, as humanity prepared to send a message of its own. General Rivas, a man with scars from past wars, was given command of the human fleet. His reputation was one of calm in the face of danger, but there was a fire inside him now. The loss of the Mars colony weighed heavily on his heart. He knew that this wasn't just about defeating an enemy. It was about protecting everything humanity had worked for. His first order was simple: gather the best pilots, the strongest warriors, and the smartest engineers. The recruitment centers on Earth were overwhelmed. Volunteers signed up without hesitation. Farmers, teachers, students, all wanted to be a part of this war. Some said it was for their children, others for their families, but all were driven by the same burning need for revenge. The Kharn had taken something they could never give back. In space, the situation was just as tense. The human fleet, though small in comparison to the Kharn's massive armadas, was made up of ships unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The Titan-class warships were humanity's trump card. They were fast, agile, and designed for destruction. No ship, not even the mighty Kharn battleships, could match them in speed. They were armed with high-powered plasma cannons, and their shields were stronger than anything Earth had ever built. Each Titan-class ship could carry hundreds of fighters and troops, ready for any assault. The scientists, who had been working on a top-secret project for years, were ready to unveil their newest creation: the Judgment Ray. A weapon of unimaginable power, it harnessed the energy of a small black hole to create a beam that could destroy entire cities in seconds. It was humanity's last hope, but the decision to use it was not one they made lightly. If the Kharn did not surrender, if they continued their path of destruction, the Judgment Ray would be humanity's answer. The final touch to the plan was the spy team that had been sent to the Kharn homeworld. They had gathered valuable intel, learning about the Kharn's weaknesses and their military tactics. But one thing was still unclear: why had the Kharn attacked so suddenly? What did they want? And was there any hope for peace, or was this just a war to the death? General Rivas stood on the deck of the flagship, the Eagle's Pride, looking out into the stars. His mind raced. He thought about the brave souls he had lost in previous wars, about the children who would never grow up on Mars, about the families torn apart by the Kharn's cruelty. But he also thought about humanity's strength. No matter how dark the days had been, humanity had always found a way to rise. "Are we ready?" he asked his crew. "We're ready, sir," the communications officer replied. Rivas nodded. "Then let's show them what humanity can do." The fleet began its journey. It wasn't just a military operation. It was a statement. Every human ship was carrying the weight of every family lost, every life taken, every dream shattered. They were not just going to war with the Kharn. They were going to war for their future, for their right to exist. As the fleet moved through deep space, the silence was broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional voice over the radio. They had passed the point of no return. The battle was coming, and humanity was prepared to give everything. The mood aboard the fleet was a strange mix of tension and resolve. The soldiers checked their weapons, the engineers double-checked the systems, and the pilots took their positions. No one spoke much. The truth was, they were all thinking the same thing. If they failed, humanity might never recover. The Kharn would be unstoppable, and Earth would be lost forever. As they neared the Kharn-controlled territory, the fleet received a message. It was short and direct: "Turn back now, or face the consequences." General Rivas listened to the message, his face a mask of calm. He knew that Xarn would not negotiate, and he had no intention of turning back. He pressed a button, sending a simple reply. "We do not fear you." The fleet advanced, and the stars ahead seemed to burn brighter with every passing moment. The Xarn were waiting, but they would not expect what was coming. Humanity was done being a victim. This time, humanity would strike first. The first battle was just hours away, and it would be a battle like no other. The tension was unbearable as the fleet approached the first Xarn outpost. A soft hum filled the air inside the command room of the Eagle's Pride, the flagship leading humanity's charge. General Rivas stood before the window, staring into the cold void of space, his thoughts sharp and clear. They were about to strike first. Humanity's message would be sent loud and clear. They were not afraid, and they would never back down. The Xarn outpost, located on a barren moon in the outer rim of their empire, was nothing like Earth's colonies. It was cold, hostile, and surrounded by jagged mountains that loomed like silent sentinels. The moon was dark, with only a few weak lights flickering on the surface. Humanity's fleet had already sent a warning, and it had been ignored. Now, it was time to show the Xarn what it meant to provoke mankind. On board the Eagle's Pride, every crew member was at their post, ready for the strike. The atmosphere was quiet, almost reverent. Even the engines, powerful and roaring moments before, now seemed to hum with anticipation. This was not just a battle. It was a declaration. It was a reminder that humans had a history of surviving the worst, and if anyone thought they would be wiped out easily, they were sorely mistaken. "We're in position," General, reported Commander Matthews, his voice steady but full of determination. Rivas turned from the window and looked out at the officers. "We do this together. We fight for every life lost on Mars, for every innocent destroyed by these creatures. We show them the true strength of humanity." With a final nod, the attack began. The fleet launched its first assault on the Xarn outpost. The Titan-class warships moved swiftly, faster than any Xarn ship had ever seen. Their sleek forms cut through the void like shadows as the first shots rang out. The Xarn had not expected such a fast, organized attack. Their defenses were shattered within minutes, their shields buckling under the power of human weaponry. Plasma cannons lit up the dark sky, carving through the outpost's defenses with brutal precision. On the surface of the moon, chaos erupted. Xarn soldiers, once thought to be invincible, scrambled for cover as human fighters descended. The humans fought with a fire that was impossible to ignore. They had lost everything to the Xarn, and now they would take it all back. But as the humans pushed forward, they soon discovered something they hadn't expected. The Xarn were not the only threat. Among the ruins of the outpost, hidden from sight, were new, terrifying weapons. These weapons were not like anything the humans had encountered before. They were biomechanical creatures, vicious and fast, designed for one thing: to kill. These creatures were faster than the humans, and their claws tore through metal like it was paper. As human soldiers fought back, General Rivas watched from the command deck, his mind working quickly. This was no ordinary enemy. But this was not the time to falter. They would have to adapt. "Deploy the ground units," Rivas ordered. "We need to take control of the moon, not just destroy it." The Eagle's Pride launched its ground forces, and thousands of soldiers descended onto the surface in combat dropships. The atmosphere was thick with the sound of heavy fire, the scream of engines, and the cries of soldiers as they fought for their lives. The battle was now a brutal close-quarters fight. Rivas was in constant communication with the ground commanders. "Push forward," he ordered, his voice hard and sharp. "Take the high ground and neutralize all remaining threats." As the humans fought to secure the surface, the battle turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Xarn had set traps, and the biomechanical creatures were everywhere. But the humans, driven by the memories of those they had lost, fought through the pain, the blood, and the fear. They had no choice. This was their fight to win. In one area, Captain Harris, leading a squad of soldiers, found himself face to face with a Xarn general. The creature was unlike any enemy they had fought before. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its body covered in thick armor. Its eyes glowed red with fury, and its mouth opened to reveal rows of sharp teeth. Without hesitation, Captain Harris fired first. The Xarn general charged, its weapon raised, but Harris and his team fought with everything they had. The Xarn general fell, but not without taking down 3 of Harris's men. The price of victory was high, and the cost of revenge was blood. By the time the sun rose on the dark moon, the outpost was destroyed. Humanity had won, but at a heavy cost. The fleet had taken control of the area, and the remaining Xarn forces had retreated. General Rivas stood at the front of the Eagle's Pride, looking out at the moon below. The first strike was over, but it was only the beginning. "We've won this battle," he said, his voice low but filled with pride. "But this war is far from over." The fleet turned toward their next target. The Xarn had no idea what was coming. They had made the mistake of thinking humanity was weak, but humanity had shown them something different. Now they would feel the full fury of the earth. The victory over the Xarn outpost was just the beginning, but it was a bitter one. Humanity had shown their strength, but as the fleet regrouped and prepared for the next phase, General Rivas knew something far more dangerous loomed ahead. The Xarn were a proud race, and the defeat on the moon would only fuel their anger. It was only a matter of time before they would strike back, harder, faster, and with everything they had. But the moment of peace that followed was brief. In the dark halls of the Eagle's Pride, Rivas paced, his mind working through every possible scenario. The fleet was strong, but the Xarn were relentless. No one knew their true numbers or their full strength. They were playing a dangerous game, and for once, it felt like the humans were on the losing side. Then, without warning, a message came. It wasn't from the Xarn, but from an unknown source. The transmission was encrypted, but the words were chilling. "They know you're coming. They know everything. It's a trap." Rivas's heart sank. He had hoped for a few moments of calm, a chance to prepare for the next battle. But it seemed that Xarn had anticipated everything. It was not just a military war anymore. It was a war of minds. The Xarn had spies. They knew the humans would try to infiltrate their territory. And now, the trap was set. "We've been outsmarted," Rivas muttered, his fist clenched. "It's too soon." The crew scrambled to trace the origin of the message, but it was useless. It had come from within the Xarn homeworld's inner network, a place that had been sealed off from every outside signal for centuries. The Xarn were ready, and they had been waiting. Within hours, the fleet had already begun moving toward the next target, the heart of the Xarn Empire. The plan was simple: strike hard and fast before they could fortify their defenses. The ships moved in silence, cloaked and hidden in the darkness of space, hoping the Xarn wouldn't be able to track them. But as they neared the Xarn capital, the fleet's sensors picked up a strange pattern, a series of energy signatures scattered throughout the system, like a web of invisible threats. Something was off. Rivas knew it. "They're waiting for us," he said grimly. "Prepare for anything." Then, just as the fleet entered the outer boundaries of the Xarn homeworld, a voice cut through the communications channels, loud and clear. It was a Xarn voice, but it wasn't the usual arrogant tone. This was different. This one carried a dark promise. "You think you can break us? You think you can stop us? You've only just begun to understand who you're dealing with. Welcome to your end." The message sent chills down every soldier's spine. The Xarn were not just warriors. They were strategists, masters of deception. Humanity had walked right into their trap, and now there was no turning back. General Rivas's fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair. The battle was no longer about victory. It was about survival. They had underestimated the Xarn, and now they had to pay the price. "Prepare for emergency action," Rivas ordered. "We're engaging the enemy at full force. I want every ship on high alert. Move quickly, but stay coordinated." The fleet moved in closer, but as they did, they began to encounter strange energy fields. It was as though the very fabric of space was being twisted, bent, and manipulated. Every time they tried to approach the Karn homeworld, they were pushed back. The energy walls were unlike anything they had seen before, flickering with bursts of green light. There was no way to penetrate them. The fleet had no choice but to fall back, regroup, and reassess their strategy. For hours, the ships drifted, trapped in the Xarn's web. But during that time, something unexpected happened. An encrypted message arrived. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a challenge. "We know your every move," the message said, "but we also know your weakness. Come to the planet's surface if you want to find out what real power is." Rivas knew that this was no simple threat. The Xarn were daring them to land. They were toying with them, knowing they would be desperate enough to play along. "It's a trap," Rivas murmured to himself. "But we have no choice. We must go." The fleet began preparing for the landing operation. The ground forces, once ready to fight in open space, were now getting ready for what they would face on the Xarn homeworld. But no one knew what awaited them. Would they be walking into an ambush? Or was this an opportunity the Xarn wanted to offer, one that could turn the tide of the war? The moment the ships descended into the atmosphere of the Xarn planet, the chaos began. They were met with a massive storm. Strange lightning storms and flashing waves of energy pulsed through the skies, throwing the fleet off course. But the landing continued. The planet's surface was desolate, with towering structures reaching into the sky like massive spikes of metal and stone. Everything about the place felt wrong. It was a city built on power, built to intimidate, but it was empty. That's when they saw it. Standing in the center of the city, a giant figure emerged from the shadows. It was the Karn Emperor, towering over them, its armor glinting in the strange light. His eyes were glowing with a fierce intelligence, and his every movement seemed calculated, dangerous. "You came. You're fools," the Emperor said, his voice echoing through the empty streets. "But now you will pay the price." Humanity had walked right into the heart of the Xarn Empire, and now it would have to face the full power of the Xarn forces, all hidden in the shadows. But General Rivas wasn't afraid. He had no choice but to move forward, to face the impossible. They were deep inside the Xarn's domain, and they were about to find out just how far the Xarn would go to destroy humanity. The battle that awaited them was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. As the human forces advanced into the heart of the Xarn city, the ground seemed to tremble beneath their boots. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant hum of unknown technology. The towering structures of metal and stone surrounded them, but they held no warmth, no sign of life except the cold, calculating presence of the Xarn forces. General Rivas and his squad moved forward cautiously, their weapons ready. They had landed in the heart of what was once the Xarn Empire's most sacred city, a place where the strongest of the Xarn leaders had ruled for centuries. It was said that the Xarn had built their entire civilization on the blood and bones of their enemies, and now it seemed the human race was next in line. The streets were dark, lit only by the eerie green glow from strange energy sources embedded within the buildings. No sound of battle reached their ears, and the silence was unsettling. As the humans advanced, they realized they had walked straight into a trap, one designed not just to kill, but to break their spirits. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted. A massive rumble shook the city, and the very buildings seemed to come alive. The sky above them flickered with strange lights, and before they could react, a massive blast of energy shot out from the ground, striking their formation with devastating force. The explosion sent soldiers flying, their armor torn apart by the sheer power of the blast. But the Xarn didn't stop there. From all sides, Xarn soldiers emerged from hidden doorways and cracks in the buildings, their weapons drawn, their eyes glowing with cold malice. General Rivas barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. Form a defensive line. We can't let them overwhelm us. The humans fought back fiercely, using every weapon at their disposal. Plasma rifles fired in rapid bursts, tearing through the Karn soldiers as they advanced. But the Karn were relentless, more numerous than they had anticipated, and they fought with a brutal precision. They were not just warriors. They were predators, and humanity was their prey. In the distance, Rivas saw something that made his blood run cold. The Xarn Emperor stood at the top of a massive staircase, his towering form silhouetted against the dark sky. His eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and his voice echoed through the streets like thunder. "You came to destroy us, but you fail to understand," the Emperor said, his voice deep and booming. "We are not just a race. We are an idea, a force of nature. You have awakened something far older, far more powerful than you can comprehend." Rivas' fists clenched. The Emperor's words were meant to break their will, but he wouldn't let it. The human spirit had been tested time and time again, and each time it had risen stronger. This was no different. "Push forward," Rivas shouted, leading his forces into the heart of the enemy city. "We fight for our future. We fight for our families." With those words, the human soldiers surged forward, a wave of unrelenting fury crashing against the Karn forces. But the battle was far from over. The Xarn were not just defending. They were testing humanity's resolve, pushing them to their limits. The streets became a maze of blood and fire as the two sides collided. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the city, a different kind of warfare was unfolding. A small group of human engineers, led by Lieutenant Sanders, had been tasked with infiltrating the Xarn's central power grid. The city was powered by a complex network of energy conduits and reactors, and if the humans could disable them, they could cripple the Xarn's entire military operation. But getting to the power core would be no easy task. The Karn had turned the entire city into a deadly maze of traps and sentries. "Stay sharp," Sanders whispered to his team as they moved through the darkened corridors of the Xarn's underworld. "One wrong step, and we're dead." They crept through the narrow passages, avoiding detection by the Xarn's advanced sensors. Every corner held the potential for an ambush, and every door they opened could lead them directly into the heart of the enemy's defenses. But they were determined to succeed. The fate of humanity depended on them. Above ground, the battle raged on, with Rivas leading the charge. He knew that time was running out. They had to push forward and take the city center, or they would lose everything. The Xarn Emperor's taunts echoed in his mind. "You have awakened something more powerful than you know." Rivas didn't know what that meant, but he had a feeling the worst was yet to come. The fight grew fiercer as the humans and Xarn clashed in close-quarters combat. Explosions rocked the streets, sending dust and debris into the air. The Xarn were relentless, their every move calculated, their every strike precise. But the humans fought with the desperation of those who had nothing left to lose. They had lost Mars, they had lost their families, and they would not lose their future. As they neared the Emperor's location, the humans encountered a new type of enemy. Xarn biomechanical soldiers, towering giants of metal and flesh. These creatures were stronger, faster, and more durable than anything the humans had faced before. They wielded massive energy weapons and tore through the human lines with terrifying speed. Rivas knew that their only chance was to disable the biomechanical soldiers before they could reach the heart of the city. He signaled for a squad of soldiers to flank the creatures, using the terrain to their advantage. They fought with all their strength, but it became clear that they couldn't hold their ground much longer. "Fall back," Rivas ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "We need to regroup. Find a way to destroy their command center." But just as they began to retreat, the Xarn Emperor descended from his high perch, his massive form casting a shadow over the battlefield. His eyes burned with rage, and his voice rang out like a battle cry. "Your fight ends here, human." The ground beneath them trembled as the Emperor raised his weapon, and a massive pulse of energy shot out, obliterating everything in its path. The force was so powerful that it sent shockwaves through the city, shaking the very foundations of the Xarn Empire. Rivas's heart raced as the battle turned into a deadly race against time. Humanity was on the brink of total annihilation, and the Xarn were pushing them to the edge. But in the depths of the struggle, there was a spark. Humanity would never back down. Even in the face of overwhelming power, they would keep fighting. The Emperor had underestimated them. He had made a fatal mistake. Humanity would rise again. The Xarn Empire had underestimated humanity, and it was a mistake that would cost them everything. General Rivas stood on the battlefield, his eyes locked on the Xarn Emperor, who was still standing tall despite the chaos surrounding him. The Emperor's massive form loomed like a dark tower, the pulse of energy in his hand threatening to tear apart everything in its path. But Rivas knew something the Emperor didn't. Humanity had an indomitable spirit that could not be crushed by force alone. The Xarn had unleashed their full fury, but now it was time for humanity to show what it meant to fight for survival. "Hold the line," Rivas shouted, his voice carrying across the battlefield, cutting through the noise of explosions and gunfire. "We're not done yet." His words resonated with the soldiers around him, pushing them to dig deep and fight harder. The Xarn were fierce and relentless, but they were not invincible. Every soldier knew that this fight wasn't just for victory. It was for the future of humanity, for their homes, their families, and everything they had left to lose. And they would not let it all slip away now. As the ground shook with the Emperor's devastating energy pulses, Rivas made a decision. The Emperor's weapon was too powerful, and the human forces were struggling to hold their ground. They needed to take the battle to him, right to the heart of the Xarn's most deadly weapon. The command center, a colossal structure that towered over the battlefield, was their only hope. If they could disable the Emperor's power source, they could cripple the Xarn's ability to fight back. "We need to get to the command center," Rivas said, his eyes scanning the battlefield. Now, the command center was located at the top of a steep hill, surrounded by Xarn forces and deadly traps. The closer they got, the more dangerous the terrain became. But Rivas knew that this was their only shot. With the Emperor's weapon still wreaking havoc on the battlefield, they had to act fast before they were all wiped out. He signaled to Lieutenant Sanders, the officer in charge of the infiltration team, who was still working on disabling the Xarn's power grid beneath the surface of the city. The team had managed to avoid most of the traps, but they were running out of time. The city's energy fields were starting to stabilize, and if they couldn't disable the core soon, the Emperor would unleash his full power on them. "Sanders, report." Rivas barked into his comms. "We're in position." Sanders responded, his voice steady despite the tension. "We're just a few meters away from the core, but we need more time. We've almost bypassed the last layer of security, but it's tight." Rivas clenched his jaw. Time was something they didn't have much of. "We're coming to you. Hold on." Rivas turned to his squad, his expression resolute. "We push forward now. No retreat. No surrender. We take that command center, or we die trying." The squad moved out, cutting through the dense streets of the Xarn city. The sound of gunfire and explosions was deafening, but the soldiers were focused, their eyes locked on the target. They had seen too much destruction, lost too many comrades, to turn back now. Each step brought them closer to the Emperor's stronghold, and they weren't about to let this fight slip away. As they neared the base of the hill leading to the command center, they encountered more Xarn soldiers, more of the biomechanical creatures that had become the deadliest part of the Xarn forces. These creatures were larger, faster, and more lethal than anything they had faced so far. Their claws gleamed in the dim light, and their eyes burned with an inhuman hunger. But the humans were ready. They had no choice but to fight. The battle turned into a chaotic blur of gunfire, hand-to-hand combat, and explosions. The biomechanical creatures were nearly unstoppable, But the human soldiers fought with everything they had, knowing that their survival depended on it. Rivas and his team pushed forward, cutting down every obstacle in their path, refusing to let the Ktarn stand in their way. The hill grew steeper as they climbed, and the air became thick with the smell of burning metal and smoke, but they couldn't afford to stop. The command center was within their grasp, and they had to reach it before the Emperor could launch his final assault. Finally, they'd reached the top of the hill, where the command center loomed above them. It was a massive structure, built to withstand the most intense attacks. But the humans had something the Xarn could not anticipate: the will to survive. Inside the command center, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Rivas led his squad into the darkened halls, his eyes scanning every corner for danger. They moved quickly, following the faint hum of machinery that guided them toward the heart of the facility. The deeper they went, the more intense the feeling of danger became. Every step could be their last. Then they reached its core. It was a massive chamber, its walls lined with shimmering energy conduits. At the center of the room stood a massive power core, pulsing with an unearthly glow. This was the heart of the Xarn's weapon, the source of their devastating energy. But as Rivas and his team prepared to disable the core, a voice echoed through the chamber. It was the Emperor. "You think you can destroy us?" The Emperor's voice rang out, deep and full of scorn. "You think you can stop the power of the Xarn? You have no idea what you're up against. You are nothing." Rivas gritted his teeth, staring at the core. This was it. The fate of humanity rested on their ability to shut down the Emperor's power. With a final glance at his squad, he nodded. "Do it." Lieutenant Sanders moved forward, pulling out a set of devices designed to disable the core's energy flow. But before he could reach it, the ground shook again, and a new wave of Xarn soldiers stormed into the room. They were too late. The Xarn had anticipated their move. The squad fought back with everything they had, but they were outnumbered. Rivas knew they had to hold out just a little longer, just long enough for Sanders to finish the job. "Keep them off us," Rivas shouted, firing his weapon as the Xarn soldiers advanced. "Don't let them reach the core." The room became a blur of motion, explosions, and gunfire. Rivas's heart raced as he focused on the task at hand. If they couldn't stop the Emperor's weapon now, humanity would be finished. But he wouldn't let that happen. Not now. Not after everything they had fought for. And then, with a sudden burst of energy, the power core shut down. The lights flickered, and the hum of machinery died. The Xarn's weapon was no more. Humanity had won this battle. But at what cost? Rivas stood in the stillness, his heart pounding, knowing that the war was far from over. The Emperor had been defeated, but the Xarn were far from finished. And the fight for survival was far from over. The silence in the command center was deafening, the hum of the Xarn's power core now a memory, swallowed by the stillness of the moment. General Rivas stood in the heart of the wreckage, the weight of the victory hanging heavily on his shoulders. The core was down, the Xarn's weapon incapacitated, but the battle had taken its toll. The human forces had won this particular fight, but the war was far from over. The team had managed to hold off the Xarn soldiers long enough for Lieutenant Sanders to disable the power core, but that moment of triumph came at a great cost. Several soldiers lay motionless on the floor, their bodies scared by the violence of the fight. The weight of their loss was felt deeply by Rivas, but there was no time to mourn. The war was still raging, and the Xarn weren't the type to accept defeat quietly. "We've taken the heart of their empire," Rivas said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping into his bones. "But they won't let this go. We need to regroup and prepare for the next phase. They'll retaliate." His words were met with solemn nods from the remaining soldiers. They all understood the gravity of the situation. The Xarn were a wounded animal now, but a wounded animal was more dangerous than any other. And the humans had only scratched the surface of the Xarn's power. As the team began to gather their fallen comrades and assess their supplies, Rivas stepped outside, taking a moment to breathe in the air of the Xarn homeworld. The city was still eerily silent, the streets deserted now that the bulk of the Xarn forces had been driven back. But Revis knew better than to trust the quiet. The Xarn would regroup, and when they did, they would come back with everything they had. Back at the command center, Sanders and his team were working quickly to secure the technology they had just disabled. Their objective had been to cripple the Xarn's ability to wage war, but there were still questions that needed answering. What had the Xarn been hiding? What other weapons did they have? And how long before they could rebuild? "We've got to get this information back to Earth," Sanders said, his voice cutting through Rivis's thoughts. "If we can decrypt the Xarn tech, we can learn how to fight them better." Rivis nodded, his mind already running through the possibilities. "We don't have the luxury of time. We need to get back to the fleet and—" Before he could finish, the ground beneath them shook again, a low rumble that quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. The air grew thick with tension, and Rivis's instincts flared to life. Something was wrong. "Everyone, move," Rivis ordered, his voice now laced with urgency. "Get to the evac zone. Now." The soldiers quickly scrambled, but Rivis knew they were running out of time. Whatever the Xarn were preparing, it was going to be catastrophic. They had taken down the power core, but the Emperor's presence still loomed over them like a dark cloud. Had they truly won? As the team made their way through the darkened streets, a series of explosions erupted behind them. The Xarn weren't done yet. The retaliation had begun. Rivis's pulse quickened as he turned to see the source of the explosions. In the distance, massive ships were emerging from the atmosphere, descending toward the planet's surface with terrifying speed. The Xarn had brought in reinforcements, and they were coming in force. "They're bringing the fleet down," Rivis muttered to himself. "This is going to be bigger than we thought." But the human fleet was already in position, waiting for the signal to strike. They had been fighting for weeks to reach this point, and now was the moment when everything would either succeed or fail. The Xarn had thrown everything they had at them, but humanity had one advantage they couldn't take away: the will to survive. Rivis activated his comm device, contacting the fleet. "This is Rivis. The Xarn are retaliating in full force. I need reinforcements, and I need them now. We can't let them regroup." The voice of Fleet Commander Carlson crackled through the comm. "We're with you, General. All ships are ready. Just give the word." Rivis's hand tightened around the comm. "Then let's finish this." The fleet roared into action, streaking across the sky as the Xarn ships descended in a wave. The two sides collided in a brilliant flash of light and fire, a cataclysmic clash between two species, each fighting for its future. The Xarn fleet was formidable, but the humans had learned from their previous battles. They had seen the Xarn's tactics up close, and now they used that knowledge to outmaneuver them. In the chaos of battle, Rivis's mind raced. He needed to think fast, to adapt, because this wasn't just a war of strength anymore. It was a war of wits, and whoever could outthink the other would win. The Xarn were ruthless, but humanity had something they didn't: a capacity for innovation, for thinking outside the box. As the human forces tore through the Xarn fleet, Rivis's eyes caught a glimpse of something moving on the surface of the planet. He felt a chill run down his spine. Something was happening, something he hadn't anticipated. In the shadows of the battlefield, a new figure emerged. It was the Xarn Emperor, no longer standing idle in his command center, but leading the charge from the front lines. The Emperor's massive form was cloaked in dark armor, his eyes burning with fury as he observed the human forces. He had grown more powerful since their last encounter, and his presence alone sent waves of fear through Rivis's team. But Rivis didn't flinch. He faced worse. With a growl, the Emperor raised his hand, and the ground trembled beneath them. A wave of dark energy surged from the Emperor's hand, tearing apart everything in its path. The Xarn were desperate, but they had one last card to play. And this was it. "Move." Rivas shouted, leading his team toward the heart of the battlefield. "We take him down, or we all die trying." As the human forces rallied against the Emperor's overwhelming power, they were joined by an unexpected ally, an underground resistance of former Ktarn soldiers who had grown disillusioned with the Emperor's rule. They had been waiting for this moment, and now they would fight alongside humanity to overthrow the tyrant who had enslaved them all. Together, they surged toward the Emperor, their weapons drawn, their resolve unshakable. The final showdown had begun. For the first time in centuries, humanity had a chance not just to survive, but to win. The Emperor had brought the fight to them, but they were ready. They would never surrender. This was the fight for the future, and nothing would stop them.